BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast.
Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to this special weekend presentation of Black Box Online Radio. On the weekends, I've been doing a regular segment called Zodiac Killer New Discovery, the Moraga Letters, and this will be the concluding episode in that series, but some of you might be listening to this in the playlist. However, some of you might have just clicked on this thing here in the far-off corner of YouTube, so I want to make this episode available and understandable to everyone who might have just happened upon it, so there'll be a little bit of backtracking and refreshing. But over the past several weeks, I've had the opportunity to correspond with someone who uses the online name Sphere the Cube, also known as Sphery, and that's what I'll be calling him throughout the duration of this recording. And we were discussing his findings in the Zodiac Killer mystery, and not only has he made observations about the letters and the ciphers, he also has a new Zodiac Killer suspect named Robert Volvins. And not even stopping there, but Spheri has also identified some other possible crimes that may have been attributed, or should be attributed, to the Zodiac Killer, rather. Firstly, Robert Volvins was born in 1947. He was 21 years old at the time of the Zodiac's first crime, the Lake Herman Road murders, and he would have been 22 during the bulk of Zodiac activity, from the time of the Blue Rock Springs shooting to the murder of Paul Stein on October 11th of 1969. So a 21, 22-year-old Zodiac. He was estimated to have been 6 feet tall, possibly 6'1". Now, there are photos of Robert Volvins. I've seen them. He does have a very strong resemblance to the Zodiac Killer's composite sketch. And I was just discussing this with Spheri and then asking him, do you want to reveal them or not? This is the concluding episode. Why not reveal even one photo of Robert Volvins? And he said no, ultimately because Robert Volvins is still alive, and he's still a private citizen who has never been convicted of any of these crimes, let alone accused of any of these crimes. And the other condition is, because he is still alive, Robert Volvins is an alias or pseudonym. It's something that was made up for the show, that is not his legal name or an alias that was even used by him. That is just what we're calling him, again, to acknowledge the fact that he has not been convicted of these. And the first thing that I learned about in Spheri's Zodiac Killer theory was the use of Pig Latin in the Z18 code. The Zodiac Killer very famously mailed a cipher in July of 1969 that was in 3 parts, and it took some time to assemble it and then decode it. It was decoded by Don and Betty Hardin, and it revealed, I like killing people because it's so much fun. It's even more fun than hunting wild game in the forest, because man is the most dangerous animal of all. And it goes on for a while, all the way to the final line, which is more or less incomprehensible. There isn't a quite clear understanding on what the final 18 characters in the Z408 mean. That's why they're referred to as the Z18 code. And then Spheri had the idea that first you unscramble the letters, then you translate the words from Pig Latin to English. And this is why everyone has missed the beat. It's because you translate them from Pig Latin to English, and then you rearrange the words, and it reveals the tip, "Hi, I'm Robert." Pig Latin, like iptre, itre, obitre, putting the syllables at the end and adding the a syllable to conclude the word. And before anybody thinks that that is too far out, I just happened upon a code book recently that talked about very simple ways to create codes, and on page 5 it talked about, well, you can use Pig Latin, and that was from the 1960s, mind you, so these things would have been definitely easily available to people, and this type of influence would have been present in somebody's thought process. And the only other piece of summary I will offer you before I get to Spheri's new revelation is that he wanted to be very clear that he's not an the possession of hundreds of Moraga letters, hundreds of documents that may have been written by the Zodiac Killer, or even hundreds of documents that have been written by Robert Volvins. Instead, the focus of the series, in calling it the Moraga letters, was looking at how do certain influences affect people's writing. And the majority of similarities I have found in the Zodiac case compared to the Volvins family do not come from Robert. They come from his brother, or brothers plural. They come from his sister. And when you look at them, about how the Zodiac would insert words the way that Robert's sister would insert words using the arrow point, the way the Zodiac Killer wrote Slaves in Paradise on the Halloween card intersecting on the letter A, and Robert's brother, the younger brother, would intersect words on the letter A. The way that there's a similarity in handwriting to Robert's older brother, and all of these similarities have been put together. And people didn't have the internet, people didn't have email, people didn't have text messages and smartphones and DMs back in 1969 or throughout the entirety of the 1960s. So the way that people kept in touch was not only by phone call but by writing letters and corresponding, and that these are the things that would have influenced his personality. But Spheri has gone way beyond just looking at some things like Pig Latin and things like the way the letters are written. Those are like linguistic clues. What he has also done is propose solutions to the ciphers using mathematical elements, and one of them was the Z32. And the Z32 is one that Spheri, I think, is still trying to work all the kinks out, but Gareth Penn wrote a book called Time 17, where he was talking about how the Zodiac Killer mystery is actually filled with mathematical signatures. The Zodiac wasn't only a serial killer, he was also someone who was creating this elaborate plot involving mathematical connections. Like, a lot of the activities that the Zodiac is doing actually have a deeper meaning when you analyze them mathematically. And Richard Granelvo of ZodiacCiphers.com gave one of the more devastating takedowns of Gareth Penn, pointing out how he may have been on to something, but Gareth Penn's biggest discovery was that if you put an angle of 57.29 degrees on top of Mount Diablo in California, one arm of the radian goes to Blue Rock Springs where Darlene Ferrin was murdered, and the other arm of the radian goes to Presidio Heights, where Paul Stein, the final victim, was murdered, and the Zodiac said in a letter concerns radians and inches along the radians, but the Zodiac was talking very clearly about how he's not trying to identify the kill sites, he's trying to clue people in on the location of a bomb. So is it possible that the interpretation of Gareth Penn was completely off, or that Gareth Penn made mistakes, or he was clued in to use the radian in a particular way, but his approach was inaccurate? Well, Spheri has some things that perhaps even go beyond Gareth Penn, and that is that it says concerns radians and inches along the radians. And when we look at particular Zodiac correspondence, the Zodiac wrote equals 13 on the side, but he also wrote SFPD, and it appears to be an O or a 0, and most people just think that that means that the Zodiac is talking about how maybe he has killed 13 people or he has 13 victories, and SFPD hasn't caught him, so they have 0. San Francisco Police Department. But Spheri began to view the situation differently, and what he thought was that if you use the central point of the Zodiac's circle with the cross going through it, the crosshairs, the unit circle, whatever we call the Zodiac symbol, you take the exact center of it and you place that on Mount Diablo, then SFPD is formed in a line segment going straight. You can draw just any line segment going anywhere, right? So you draw the line to SFPD, the San Francisco Police Department building. Then that forms an angle of 242 degrees. But the Zodiac also clued people in with the Phillips 66 map, saying that you had to set your compass to magnetic north. Magnetic north would alter this by 17 degrees. So 242 minus 17 is 225 degrees. And in mathematics, something that resembles the Zodiac killer's symbol is called the unit circle, which is talking about radians. And the angle of 225 degrees is 5 pi over 4 radians. You following all this? And you can do this in the first quadrant. You make the angle of 45 degrees, goes through that, and then that would form an obtuse angle of 225 degrees going through quadrant 3. Yes, the one on the top right corner would be quadrant 1, then quadrant 2 would be on the top left, on the bottom left would be quadrant 3, and then the bottom right would be quadrant 4. So this line, we just put a line right through it, almost cutting it in half diagonally. We have a line of 45 degrees and then 225 degrees. And that means that it's going to concern inches along the radian. So we go on this radian line, this 225 degree angle, and we're supposed to look for something, right? We're supposed to look for the location of a bomb. Now, to simplify, or to illustrate rather, to elaborate, if you were to just hypothetically close off this quadrant, turn it into a square or rectangle or even a cube, if you will, and we were to draw a circle within the square that we've just created, we now have a new zodiac symbol, a new circle with a cross going through it, and the exact center of that one could be the location of the bomb. And where is that? Moraga, California. And I think that's the biggest contribution that Spheri has offered in this particular series, and that is that there's the Moraga connection. That the Zodiac Killer may have planted a bomb in Moraga, California, and I believe in the first episode when I was discussing Spheri's observation, he said something to the effect of the solution to the Zodiac's final cipher, the Z32 cipher, could be, okay, it's in Moraga, California, Deo Valenti box by the West Chapel, and again, paraphrasing, and I'm paraphrasing for a reason because I think even to this day he's still working out the kinks on that, or he's trying to decipher the Z32, but it's talking about how it's by a box that is near the chapel in Moraga, California, hence the name of the series, the Moraga Letters, the Moraga Connection. And Moraga is on the radian, and it does appear to be in that particular way. But this is something that I think makes a little bit more sense on how the Zodiac Killer would have been trying to clue people in on the location of a bomb, because Spheri's approach is actually offering a piece of particular information. And I had a very big question for Spheri once. I was like, now wait a second. You're talking about the location of a bomb, but the Zodiac Killer didn't actually detonate a bomb, right? And he's like, well, yes, that's true, right? So my response was, well, what do you think happened? Because on a personal note, when I was first exposed to these things, the Zodiac Killer's talking about taking credit for murders that he can't prove, I was like, he's a liar. When the Zodiac Killer talks about setting a bomb off and then the bomb didn't go off, or he's talking about hiding a bomb somewhere but no one found the bomb and it wasn't detonated, I was thinking, he's a liar. He's just making it up. He's trying to scare people. It's easier to scare people than it is to actually commit the crime. And Spheri offered a possible solution, or possible situation and scenario, rather, that I had never really quite heard from other people, and that is that the Zodiac may have had a brief moment of humanity, or for some reason he thought that the detonation of a bomb was maybe too extreme, or maybe he thought that if he actually detonated the bomb in Moraga, California, it would cause a problem for him. So there was a real bomb that was created. However, the Zodiac removed it from its location near the Moraga Chapel. Like, it was created, it was planned to have been detonated, but the Zodiac thwarted his own plan. He canceled his own plan to detonate a bomb in Moraga, California. And some other interesting things about this Moraga connection is that because of you guys in the comments section, I was introduced to the channel Spins and Needles, which has a video called Moraga, California Skull Found Hanging, Unsolved Mystery Near St. Mary's College, Contra Costa County, 1937. In short, this is the story of the Moraga hanging skull, and the man was actually identified as Henry Bellafield. And when this guy passed away, I don't think Henry Bellafield had any idea that decades later he would have been the subject of numerous episodes of Black Box Online Radio, let alone other places on the internet such as the Spins and Needles channel. But human curiosity really has expanded throughout the internet age, and this is the story of the Moraga hanging skull, about how a man either shot himself in the head, or he committed suicide by hanging, or maybe he was murdered, and the body was hanging from a tree for a substantial amount of time, perhaps even more than a year, and his skull remained hanging from the tree while the rest of his body from the neck and below had gone to the ground. And the odd thing is, no gun was found anywhere nearby, yet he had a bullet in his head. So you could be like, well, he committed suicide by hanging, but he wanted to shoot himself in the head before his body fell to make sure that he was dead. Well, if that's the case, where's the gun? And one theory was that natural elements washed it away, because more than a year he would have gone through the snow and the melting of the snow, let alone things like flooding or some type of small mudslide. And the other possibility is that he was indeed murdered, and that he was told to put the noose around his neck while someone held him at gunpoint, and that person shot him. It's an unsolved death, unsolved suspicious death, but it does appear to resemble maybe a suicide a little bit more than a murder. But this occurred in 1937, and I'll just read out the page written by Spins and Needles. I invite you to like and subscribe to that channel as well. A true crime mystery involving a hanging and shooting, but what happened first? A most important piece of evidence was missing from the newspaper report of November 12, 1937. Was it held back or really missing? The skeletal remains of Henry Bellafield were found 4 miles southwest of Moraga, California, home of St. Mary's College, in lonely Redwood Canyon, Contra Costa County. Deputy Sheriffs Raze Stoffels and P.N. Donaldson gathered evidence. The medical examiner in this case was available in those days, and was certainly presented with a strange and curious situation. So, I think that this would not have been a Zodiac crime in 1937, but when it was first shared with me, I believe it was presented as, could this have been something that was fueling the Zodiac killer's morbidity? And people would share stories like this on college campuses. The story of the Moraga hanging skull. I do think there's a certain possibility in the residents of Moraga, California, or at St. Mary's College, having knowledge of the Moraga skull and the story of Henry Bellafield. But what Spheri also found out is that the exact location of where Henry Bellafield died is not on the radian on this line of 225 degrees, but rather the part there that does stand out is Redwood Canyon, and in the Redwood Grove, there's a place that is on the line, that is on this radian, and that is where students of St. Mary's College had their Halloween parties in this in a Redwood Grove area. So that does also seem to tie in to a particular location that could go straight to Mount Diablo, straight to the SFPD building, and also that it's talking about some way somehow that this could have maybe been an influence on the Zodiac Killer's Halloween card. And I think that Spheri has also made some very bold observations about how the Zodiac Killer isn't simply just some jerk who wanted to murder people, to hunt them for sport, and to brag about it in the letters. The Zodiac Killer was actually someone who was very thoughtful, attentive, and paying attention to society, feeling betrayed by society, but starting with a lot of abuse that he would have experienced growing up, and then also just the possible rejection of certain peers, not really being completely welcomed by everyone. So what the Zodiac Killer wanted to do was he wanted more or less to bring destruction about to society. He was someone who had been raised in the Catholic tradition, and he wanted to make a mockery of that, and that when the Zodiac Killer actually mailed the Halloween card, he was talking about Jesus Christ on the cross, and that the skeleton that was placed on top of the spider web, or next to the spider web, I repeat, next to the spider web, was actually meant to be a crucifix. And the reason for this is that Siri has a larger theory about how the Zodiac Killer was trying to recreate the concept of the false prophet. He was trying to show that he was going to bring about destruction. He's making a mockery of all of the values and institutions that a society would hold dear, as well as things that would just bring warmth and comfort to other people, targeting lovers' lanes, sending in taunting letters, threatening that he's going to kill people, also, and making a mockery of the religious aspect, which the Zodiac did from the very beginning, even in the first letter, spelling the word Christmas incorrectly, spelling it Christ Mass, that he killed 2 kids on Christ Mass, and this is something that I do think is consistent throughout the Zodiac's letters, because he would also mail the Exorcist letter in 1974, where he says that the Exorcist, which is, of course, a religious and spiritual practice, exorcism, the Exorcist is the best satirical comedy that I've ever seen, and so on. So that is consistent, but I will get back to Spheri's observations, because he just wants to show that the Zodiac is putting an enormous amount of thought and attention into everything that he is creating. An additional point in Spheri's theory is that the Zodiac Killer had a halt in activity, a cease in activity, from 1972 to 1973. People will often write it as 1971 to 74, but what they really mean is that the Zodiac Killer was not operating in 1972 or 73. There are no letters, no murders that are taken place in California where the Zodiac has taken credit for them via phone call or writing a message on the car door nearby. Some people insist that Zodiac crimes occurred in during that time, but they've just been hidden a little bit. And one person who would have said that would have been the Zodiac Killer. After the murder of Paul Stine, the Zodiac said very clearly that he was not going to announce his crimes to the world in the same way. Instead, what he was going to do was make them look like routine robberies and accidents. Well, one crime that occurred in the Midwest was the murder of Laura Jean Dugan in 1972. And before we look at locations, Spheri does have letters in his possession that state that Robert Volvins was in California for 1968 and 69, and he even wrote a letter in 68 saying that he was not going to come home for Christmas. He sends this on December 3rd of 1968, I believe, and then the first Zodiac crime occurs on December 20th of 1968, so he's there until 1971. Then he goes back to the Midwest, and he returns to California in 1974. So there is a crime that occurs in 1972 in the Midwest, and it's the murder of Laura Jean Dugan. I have an episode about it here on this channel for this series called Did the Zodiac Killer Murder Laura Jean Dugan? And there was another piece of Zodiac writing, a possible Zodiac correspondence that was mailed in 1974 called the Badlands card. Now, it's talking about the movie Badlands, but Badlands is, of course, part of the Midwest. There's even a Badlands National Park. The northern Midwest has a Badlands region. Now, is this trying to clue the general public in that the Zodiac is some type of individual who has connections to a different part of the country and not only the San Francisco Bay Area? But we had one question that came in about if the Zodiac Killer committed a murder in 1972, why did he wait 2 years to take credit for it? Or not even take credit for it, because the Zodiac didn't say that he murdered Laura Jean Dugan. But why did the Zodiac clue people in on the Badlands connection 2 years after the crime took place. I mean, the Zodiac makes phone calls the day of or the night of. I mean, we're talking 40 minutes after the crime took place at Blue Rock Springs, 1 hour and 10 minutes after the crime took place at Lake Berryessa, the Zodiac called it in. And the Zodiac waited less than that when he mailed in the murder. The letters after the murder of Paul Stein, I mean, we're talking about days and weeks, and to those correspondences came out. It's under a month, is what I'm trying to say. And then the Zodiac would also mail in pieces of Paul Stein's bloody shirt in multiple letters. And the reason I was trying to be careful with my words is because even the Melvin Belli letter of December 20th, 1969, also had a piece of Paul Stein's bloody shirt, but it's definitely not 2 years. Why would the Zodiac wait 2 years to clue people in on his activities in the Midwest if he committed them in 1972? And Spheri has a response that he has written out for this episode. Why did he wait 2 years to send the Badlands card? 2 reasons. He was not the same person he was in San Francisco area when he switched contexts, where he was heavily influenced by his fantasies. When he was in the areas where he was a child, his fantasies revolved more around the dynamics of what he experienced in those years of life. He leaves that context and goes to California, and he matures in many ways. This influences his ambitions and also his connection to nature and fantasies, and the ideology is fueled in this movement. The big city transformed him, and the international travel impacted his abilities. Zodiac would zig and zag. Often he would go between a crime and a correspondence. He does this with the Mount Diablo challenge and then gets out of town. We don't hear from him for years, and then he sends the Badlands letter and then leaves where he was and heads back to San Francisco. He zigs, he zags. He should be here, but he is there. The Zodiac was there, but now he is here. It is his catch me if you can posture. He leads you where he was, so you follow him there. He controls your distance to reach him. He guides you to reach where he was, and so on, so you never conceive where he is going to be. The Zodiac is in control. Now, that is something that I do appreciate from Spheri. However, I was going to throw him a bone myself and thought about my initial response. Hypothetically, if the Zodiac killer did actually commit the murder of Laura Jean Dugan in 1972 in the Midwest, I mean, Laura Jean Dugan left her home in Montana and she's more or less roaming about and she's run away or she may have actually been abducted closer to her home, but she's found in North Dakota, even though that was not her home state at the time, and she's murdered. Well, what I simply thought was, if the Zodiac was coming back to California in 1974, then that would have been the appropriate time to take credit for the murder, because if someone mails a Zodiac letter from North Dakota or South Dakota or Montana, well, that might clue the authorities into where this guy actually lived, and he would only, if he mailed it from the Bay Area, it would have been a lot less suspicious. And that's just, as I said, throwing a bone to Spheri, giving him some things that I think would support his case. And at this point, though, to throw in my own observations, I'm having a hard time accepting that the Badlands card is authentic. I'm reminded of the Openshaw letter and the Jack the Ripper case when I looked at that and I thought, okay, there's some similar language, but it just looks like a cheap imitation or a piss-poor imitation, to be honest. Someone has put some thought into recreating it, however, it doesn't appear to be completely identical and consistent with the other Zodiac killer letters, and it's possible, make no mistake, it is possible, but if I had to bet my life on it now, I would just think that the Badlands card is not authentic, and that was not actually written by the killer. And between the two issues, though, like, is the Zodiac taking credit for a crime he committed in 1972 by writing a letter in 1974? I also would say that that is a little bit out of character for the Zodiac, and it's not completely taking credit, it's cluing people in, and I just have a hard time accepting that because, I mean, I feel that that would be such a needle in the haystack moment, and just sharing my own take on the subject. What I think is so much more valuable is Spheri's observation about the unit circle, the use of radians, actually using inches along the radians to find the location of a bomb. And as somebody once wrote in the comments section, Spheri's onto something. He's really onto something. I'm not sure what, but I can tell that he's onto something. And that's where I stand on that one. That is some definitely not only food for thought, it's almost like blazing a trail, so to speak. And I want to know, what do you guys think about the concept of using the unit circle, the 5 pi over 4 radians, angle of 225 degrees, well, going in the southward direction, and the northeast direction would be 45 degrees, using that angle to go through Moraga, California from Mount Diablo, and then locating the central point as Moraga, California, where the bomb was supposed to have been detonated. I repeat, supposed to have been detonated, meaning that it was real in conception, no matter what, whether the Zodiac canceled his own plan, or the bomb was a dud, or the bomb just didn't work for some reason, but it was planned to have been detonated there. And, I mean, that, I think, is a very, very good, honest effort. It's a valiant effort because he's actually using the parameters that have been laid forward, and it's not anything that is just so wacky that, okay, the Zodiac is telling us to look for a bomb, but I did something else with the radians, and maybe this is also true. No, he's following the rules that the Zodiac has laid out, and getting just a little bit closer. Now, some final notes on the suspect, Robert Fulvins. Okay, he was 21, 22 years old at the time of the crimes, but he did come from a life of abuse. And I want to be very, very vague with my words for a reason. He did certain abusive things to young girls, and I don't necessarily see those behaviors present in the Zodiac case, but one thing that does appear to be consistent with the behavior of a serial killer is Robert Fulvins was abused by his father, or his father was just very tough and physical with him. And by abuse, I do not mean sexual. I mean something to the effect of, he would go to school, and he got bullied, and he came home, and he was very upset one day, and then his father took him to the backyard and went even harder on him because he wanted to toughen him up. This happens very frequently with serial killer cases, being beaten by one's father, or even in other true crime cases, like I was just talking about Anthony Amiela, the M25 rapist from the United Kingdom. Same thing happened to him. Bullied at school, comes home. Once his father finds out, he's even tougher on him, trying to get him to toughen up. But the serial killer, John Wayne Gacy, though, was beaten rather severely by his father. They said that his father would beat him with a leather strap, and he would not stop, no matter how much the children begged, because this is coming from John Wayne Gacy's sister, mind you. She's telling the story of how life was like growing up with their father. So, on the one hand, I think being the victim of a very harsh upbringing is consistent with a serial killer case. I'm not convinced that the Zodiac killer was a serial killer who had any type of sexual proclivities toward young girls. So I think that that is kind of 1 point for and 1 point against looking at Robert Fulvins as a Zodiac killer suspect. But most importantly, I was tipped off because of Spheri's solution to the Z18 code, and I thought that, okay, this actually seems somewhat reasonable, that this does have a meaning, and it's not one of those things that's a dud or a mistake. And it seemed like a solid attempt at solving the Z18. And then looking at how he has composed the attempt to find the location of a bomb in Moraga, California, that also seemed like a really good observation. So, what do you think about all of this? You can put your ideas in the comment section down below. Thank you so much for listening to this series on Zodiac Killer, New Discovery, the Moraga Letters, and I appreciate all of you guys. You can always, like and subscribe, follow along to the channel. Every Monday is Zodiac Monday. You can tune in for a Zodiac Killer news report. But most importantly, please share your ideas in the comments section down below. Goodbye.